I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congressman David Joyce. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Brittany. I'm glad to be on your show.
We have a wide-ranging conversation today, so I do want to get started, though, with the looming government shutdown. Congress has to negotiate a spending deal by the end of this month. So let's start with point blank, how are those conversations going?
Well, it's tough when everybody's home in their district because when you tend to go to, let's say, chamber luncheons or political rallies, you tend to speak to your audience. And so some people, some of the comments that are being quoted out there are not necessarily indicative of where positions will be when people get back next week. I think the place when people are eyeball to eyeball and be able to get and discuss the bills more freely. And I've heard I'm the chair of Homeland Security and Appropriations Committee, and it's one of those things where I've heard people, they want to shut down Homeland. We ran on Homeland Security, and it was agreed in the conference that we were going to do the things that are necessary to secure our homeland. And if you actually read my appropriations bill, you'd see that a lot of the things that they're requesting, that they say are in HR 2, are being outlined. I important that I sit down with folks, and I brought this up on a number of conference calls that we've had over the period we've been home. And I really think when we get together next week, we'll have a much better feeling on where we stand. But I'm looking at making sure that we get our 12 appropriation bills passed. It looks like the Senate's on track to do that themselves, and then getting to the conference where the Senate and House collide, and we end up with something we can all disagree on.
Congressman, I do want to break down your comments here. When you're talking about comments from members of Congress, perhaps senators, that you're saying they don't necessarily agree with when they come back and they negotiate with you, those comments aren't really indicative of where they are. What comments are you talking about?
Well, I've heard things out there like defund the Homeland and security, and you hear other comments about that they want all things that and I really think, I know this sounds rude, but all members should take an Approps 101 and learn how the process works, because it's one thing when you're on an authorizing committee and you could say, well, we want to spend $100 million on infrastructure. Well, we at the Approps have to take the money that we have and figure out how that money is going to be spent. Further, we directed in the language, like X number of dollars can only be spent on, such as building the wall, border security. In ours, to give you an example, it's we're going to raise it from 22,000 beds to 41,000 beds for detention at the border. Alternatives to detention. It has been used in the past as maybe a 6-week thing, and people respond once in the 6 weeks and they stop the alternative detention. In other words, the buzzer, I think of, we want to keep it on the whole time. Well, that costs money as well. So, but those things are all in the bill. And Operation Stone Garden, which is one of the parts of HR 2, that's funded in the bill too. The newer technology, so we can spend more time trying to track and trace where the illegals are coming in from, versus having our Customs and Border Patrol people babysitting folks and processing them into our country. I think it's more important that we use money and spend it well on things that actually work than to continue on the system that this administration has brought upon us.
I do want to talk about Homeland Security later in the conversation, but now okay. I do want to talk about you chairing the Republican governance group, and you told this to Reuters in July. I'm not a big fan at all of shutdowns, and I don't think anybody in RG2 or our groups are really thinking about that. And quote, we're trying to think how to make things work. So when you're talking with your colleagues in the Republican governance group, how are those conversations going specifically? Where do you think you can work with Democrats, and how do you make these things work?
That's a great question. One of the things I try to do is now, my 10 years there, I'm an elder statesman, if you will, and a lot of the folks in RG2 are new. I try to explain to them, look, stay calm. You hear a lot of rhetoric again, and when the Senate's passing their bills, and we're going to pass bills, and the numbers are going to be ugly. There's no doubt about it. I mean, nobody's really going to be happy with it. But that's our first proposal. That's what we're putting out on the table. The Senate's going to be over what we agreed to in the debt ceiling agreement. We're going to be under it. But somewhere in between, that second vote you're going to take is going to be on what's necessary to fund the government. And that's the one where you're going to lose a lot of these people who say they're never going to vote for anything that increases spending or that does anything to doesn't defund Homeland or doesn't include some other program or whatever their pick of the day is there. So what we want to do is keep them focused on the fact that a lot of talk, but the rubber meets the road sometime after September 30th when the bills after conference come back and we have to agree on it. And the other thing I tell these folks is that you don't win in Washington, D.C. You win at home, and you prioritize the issues that their constituents and show them that you're fighting for them in these spending bills. And I think that's important for these folks. It's not pretty, but you could tell them that these are the things that I've helped fund. Let's secure the Homeland, to make sure that we have a common solid defense system and that we're watching the creep of China in the nation. And we're doing the things to prepare to make sure that that stops. Those are all things that are important that are funded properly if we can get our bills passed.